Mr. Nate Boyer, welcome to the show. It is an absolute honor to have you join us for an incredibly special episode of Bengals Brawl podcast. Thank you for being so gracious with your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'd like to give our listeners just a brief introduction, and we've worked on trying to summarize what makes up Nate Boyer. And Josh and I put in a considerable amount of time into trying to formulate a concise and pertinent paragraph or two, but honestly found it impossible because there's very little about you I would describe as anything but complex. You're intellectual, you're driven with a passion like very few possess, and you're convinced that anything is possible. And so far, you've proven that in nearly every facet of your life. Folks, if you're not familiar with Mr. Nate Boyer, here is our best shot at bringing you up to speed. Nate was raised in El Cerrito, California. It's a small city just north of Berkeley in the Bay Area. After high school, Nate took on a few interesting jobs, and in no particular order, he worked for a year as a deckhand on a sport fishing boat out of San Diego, tried to become the next heartthrob in Hollywood. He trained as a firefighter, and then at roughly the age 23, he made a trip to the Sudan and built refugee camps for people displaced by the war in Darfur. Had to be an absolutely incredible experience. Came back to the United States after his humanitarian efforts and joined the United States Army, and went on to gain acceptance into the Green Beret. 6 years of active duty military service. That takes us up to 2010. And Nate decides during his 6 years of active duty military service that he's going to seek out a formal education, and he decides he wouldn't mind exploring an elite level of Division I football at the same time. Which, I mean, as Josh and I were talking, that makes perfect sense since he has never played a single down of organized football prior to that decision being made. So that formula lands him at the University of Texas as a walk-on football player. Now, despite his strength advantages, I'm guessing it was a harsh realization that Coach Mac Brown wasn't looking for a mid-20-year-old safety that could not run a 4.3 40. But if you remember, Nate's an intellectual, and he quickly realized that both the backup and the starting long snappers were both seniors, and there was about to be a job opening. So Nate redshirts his freshman year. And after that season, while the rest of the team is planning out their summer, what workout camps, what class schedule they're going to attend, Nate happens to be a member of the National Guard at the time, and he's preparing for his third deployment. This time he's headed to Afghanistan. So he's looking through a slightly different lens than anybody else that's on his team. After his deployment, Nate returns to the University of Texas, and he becomes the starting long snapper for 38 consecutive games. Nate trained himself how to become a long snapper from YouTube videos. During those 38 consecutive games over the course of 3 seasons, Nate is named an academic All-American. He's named a Big 12 Sportsman of the Year. He's received the Armed Forces Merit Award, and he was named as a finalist for the William V. Campbell Trophy, which is commonly referred to as the Academic Heisman. So after his career at Texas, he goes undrafted into the NFL, but he received an undrafted free agent offer from the Seattle Seahawks, where he goes and attends camp, and he plays in the first preseason game against Denver, where he records a tackle. This officially makes him the oldest rookie in NFL history. But since then, he's gone on to appear in supporting roles in some incredible movies. He's directed, he's produced. He made an appearance in Madden 18 as Captain McCarthy, if you've ever played the long shot story in Madden 18. He's hosted the documentary series on the NFL Network called Indivisible. And do yourselves a favor, go find it right now on NFL.com. It's Indivisible with Nate Boyer. Absolutely an incredible documentary. Most public, perhaps, of all of Nate's accomplishments was his involvement in 2016 as he pens an open letter to Colin Kaepernick that was picked up and published by the Army Times. And in that letter, he outlines quite a bit of what it is that makes Nate such a special person. Mr. Nate Boyer, if I had to describe you with one single word, we've put quite a bit of thought into this. I think the word I would use is patriotic. Would you talk about the several months you spent building refugee camps in the Sudan and how that was the impetus for your substantial growth of your patriotic drive?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's not that I grew up not appreciating, the opportunities that we have here in the United States and stuff like that, but I certainly didn't realize how fortunate we were, or we are, I should say. When you're comparing it to a lot of parts of the world, I guess, and the lack of freedoms and resources and education and basic healthcare, clean water, food, stuff like that, it's not perfect by any means, but we've got a pretty good grasp on the basics, for the most part, at least having access to them. And I guess that was in 2004. So it was a couple of years after, or a few years after 9/11. I'd thought about joining the military, but hadn't seriously thought about it. And I read this Time magazine article about the tragedy in Sudan, and it talked about the Darfur and the genocide that was going on over there, and how 300,000 people had already been murdered, and these refugee camps were overflowing, and they were trying to build more, and they were behind, they were understaffed. It was almost all women and children out there because the men were out fighting or had been killed already. And it was just something that I felt drawn to help with. And to be completely honest, I was at a point in my life, pretty low point, pretty dark point, pretty lost point, I guess. And I felt like I need to do something that matters. I need to make a difference in somebody else's life and help in some way. And I just, I wanted to gain that perspective and understanding as well. So I flew myself over there. And when I got on the ground in Chad, which is the neighboring country to the Sudan, I sort of talked my way onto a United Nations flight that was going out to the refugee camps, because I didn't have proper documentation, or, I didn't have an organization I was working with. It was just, there was so much red tape, and I didn't have a college degree and all this stuff. So it wasn't as simple as just like signing up and going. So I just went, and I got on this plane, this little prop plane, flew me across the desert to these camps. And I worked with the people there, mostly, I played soccer with the kids and assisted in the medical centers and helped build campsites, and just spent those 2 months being of service in some way. And it was really fulfilling, but also like I felt purposeful, and I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I felt like I belonged. In tow with that, a lot of the people were so enamored with the United States. They wanted to talk to me about America, hear about it. And I would share, just about my experiences, which were, not limited, but like I hadn't really done anything that special. And it was just incredible to them. And I gained my patriotism through those conversations, and just felt very proud of like that opportunity. And I wanted to fight for those that can't fight for themselves, like those people, and find a way to do that. And that's what led me to the military ultimately.
Yeah, that takes us into our next question, Nate. You've been a part of what many consider the elite of the elite, from the Green Berets, the University of Texas Longhorns, the Seattle Seahawks, many of the charitable organizations that you're a part of today that include a board of directors that reads like a who's who of American greats, including working closely with a former Bengal great and Andrew Whitworth. Can you outline the similarities from your perspective that all these elite organizations have in common?
I think anything elite, but especially service organizations, you have to sort of identify a very specific problem, and work together with not only like-minded individuals but very passionate individuals to solve those problems. Because for me, problem solving is what makes me feel like I belong. Makes me feel the most alive. I need problems to solve in my life. I don't want to create more problems. That's not going to help anything except for, I guess, myself. But yeah, there's so many, our world's changing in so many different ways right now. Some of it's quite scary, obviously, but there are some incredible innovations out there as well. And I think as human beings, we need to keep adapting and growing and evolving in our thought, at least in some way. And when I think of organizations like MVP, when I think of emerging vets and players, which I co-founded with Jay Glazer, and we have so many great people involved in that. It's one of those things when you compare or try to compare a professional athlete to a combat veteran, it doesn't sound like those two would have anything in common. And you'd never want to compare combat to playing a game. So like, why bother, but the reality is that from a veteran standpoint, so many military vets, so many combat vets, especially ones that were in, infantry type units, they do feel very different. They do feel sort of outcast in a lot of ways. And so if we're not going to try to empathize through our own experiences, what that's like, maybe that bridge will never get built, so you got to take chances. And a lot of these people that are part of these organizations, that's just one example, taking that chance to at least have that conversation and really try to not just, what can I give this person, but like, how can I help this person? I think that's the biggest thing. And so it does take, sometimes it takes some pretty elite, successful people because they have that platform, they have that microphone to get other people to listen and try to understand. And so I think that's super important. And I'm proud to be a part of all those organizations, but that's just one big example. It's like, if we didn't have those big voices to say, hey, look, I'm grateful for the service of this person, but also, maybe I played in the NFL for a little while, and I'm not going to say I know what it's like to go to combat, but I will say I know what that locker room's like. And I know what it's like to lose that identity when the uniform comes off, and to no longer have that team and to now join the quote unquote real world and struggle a little bit, even if I did really well at my job before. And it's okay to admit that. It's okay to have that vulnerability and acknowledgement of like, all right, I'm starting over. I got a skill set, but maybe I don't know where to start and I need a little bit of help. We want everybody should feel comfortable reaching out and asking for help from time to time, no matter how, hard hitting you were before and how people look at you, as a superhero or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer. And it was helpful to me to read back on your story because I didn't realize how many similarities you could actually pull out from a military veteran and an NFL player. So I'm going to take it a step further. What traits do you find in the leaders between that, whether it be Mac Brown, Pete Carroll, or a commanding officer in the Green Berets? Is there similarities between those three?
Yeah, honestly, I think humility is the biggest one that I follow. And there's a big difference between fake humility, somebody acting humble because they know they're supposed to, you know what I mean? And somebody that's taking action and performing humble acts, I guess, in some way. An example of that is I've had leaders in the military that, they had decisions to make and they delegated and then they disappeared. And it's like, and that's all right. That's a way of leading. And it can be successful maybe, but it's not very inspiring to me. But I've also had leaders that if we had to do the most menial task, like, we had to clean the bathrooms, this guy would get down on his knees with the smallest toothbrush and clean the nastiest toilet after he told us all, hey, this is what we're doing together. You know what I mean? Like that, to me, like that is leadership. And also just always taking as much of I don't want to say the blame, but when you lose or when something goes wrong, the responsibility, like taking it on you is like, this is my team. I'm leading this team. Maybe I wasn't the guy who, dropped the ball, but I have to understand that's a lack of something on my part. Cause as a team, we dropped that ball. We dropped that pass, we lost that game. And there's a million different little things that go into that. And if you're the one responsible for managing those little things, then regardless, at some level it's on you. And I think just taking that responsibility, which a lot of high level coaches do, and a lot of high level military leaders do, but not all of them. Sometimes, somehow, some of those people, they find a way to shift blame. And when I see that, when I notice that, it's really hard for me to trust that person. It's really hard for me to want to have that person's back and go to battle with them, whether you were talking about figurative battle in a game or literal battle in the military.
Your involvement with Colin Kaepernick has been widely published. It was an open letter on armytimes.com. The most noteworthy and meaningful thing that I pulled out of that was how much compassion you showed and your admission of initially being angry, much like I was myself, but working through it to understand where he was coming from. Would it be safe to say that that's a key trait as well to being a part of these organizations, just understanding and evolvement as a person, as a human being?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest. It's not like I've figured all that out. I have to manage, whether it's anger or judgment or whatever you want to call it. Like that's human. That's being human. We all have those emotions. We all have those feelings, and we're going to react to things. Like you can't not react to things. What you can do is have a bit more of a measured response at times, and especially in these times when everything, well, not everything, but so many things are digital, and it's very easy to get on your phone, get on the computer and just be upset and then just spread that hate back out into the world, because we all have a voice now at some level. But, when it comes to playing football and when it comes to the military, I think a real strong acknowledgement of like where you're at, an honest one, to yourself, like, hey, I have a long way to go right now, and that's okay. I just need to work every day at it and take one step at a time and like keep moving forward. And eventually I'll get better. I will get better. I'll start to learn this new skill. And maybe if I'm really passionate about it and something I really want to do, then I should put a lot of time into it and get a lot of repetitions, put a lot of rounds down range, as we say in the military. And you start doing that, eventually you do get better, you do improve, but you have to practice it. Like you have to practice it every day. And that's that's with everything. That's the way that you live your life too. The things that you say, things that you don't say, things that you accept about yourself and about the world, the way that you treat people. Like you have to practice being a good person if you want to be a good person, or feel like a good person anyway. You have to try, and you have to do things that you don't want to do. And you have to do them when you don't want to do them sometimes. And it can suck, and also letting yourself suck for a while at something. When I was learning how to long snap, for instance, I'd never played football growing up, much less long snapped at football. And I didn't start doing it until I was like 31 years old. I knew I could figure it out if I didn't know if I could figure it out. I hoped I could figure it out if I put the time in. And so I just did, and I was like, well, the worst thing that happens is I never figure this thing out. And then I just find something else and life moves on. But if I don't try, if I don't put this time in, because I want to find a way on the field, I made the team here at Texas, but I want to play. And this is probably, from my athletic standpoint, from my ability, this is one of the only shots I'm going to have, this position. So like go all in on it and just put that time in. And, eventually, like I did start to produce results, and I think everybody does. Sometimes the results aren't enough to get what you set out to do, and that's okay too. But sometimes like things work out, and the timing is right, and you have an opportunity and a door opens and you're ready because you've been preparing and working so hard at it. And then you take advantage of that opportunity. And that's what happened with me there. That's the only reason I had a chance with the Seahawks, was because I was willing to long snap. I was willing to do a thankless job and work really hard at it to win that position, because I just wanted to play. I wanted to find a way on the field, and it's a good lesson for me, because I didn't even realize in the moment what I was doing, as far as like looking back on that. Like I just wanted to play, and I was like, oh, there's a shot at playing. I'll just do that. And I didn't realize, like, when I look back on it, how important that is as a lesson for my life moving forward, because I want to be a part of great things. I do want to be a part of greatness, and I'm not always going to be the star. Most of the time I'm not going to be the star, but if I want to be a part of it, I have to be willing to make some sacrifices and to do some things that I maybe don't necessarily want to do. But then, when you achieve and you accomplish that thing, you look back on it, like the most memorable part was the grind and the hustle, and like me being in the gym when no one else was in there and snapping footballs into a wall, you know what I mean, for hours, which sounds so boring, but it's just like that excitement of competing and the possibility of me making that dream come true. It made me feel so alive and so happy. And that's what I remember, and that's what I treasure. And so I think recognizing that, moving forward with all these other things that I'm doing, and things that I don't even know I'll be doing with the rest of my life in the future, just remembering that, like, the parts that are really tough that you don't want to get up and work towards and spend that time, that's what you'll look back on and remember as the best times. And so I was grateful for that opportunity. And I think, I learned so much of that work ethic from my time in the military, but also from before that and from after that. I think you just have to have that recognition that you don't know everything. You're not the best. Just because you love something so much, if you don't put the time in and work, you're just not going to produce results. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, there is no position in football that's as thankless as the long snapper. People would point to special teams and they would say the kicker or the punter. But on occasion, you're going to hear someone say, man, that was a heck of a kick, or man, did he just pin him back deep? No one has ever said, man, what a great snap.
Exactly.
The only time anybody mentions the long snapper is when there's a problem. That's it.
Exactly. You could do it 500 times perfect and nobody cares. You screw up once and you're the bad guy. You're the scapegoat forever.
You missed the expectation one time. Nate, like anybody that has any familiarity with your story, I've been impressed with your efforts. I work for a guy that's a humongous UT guy. So you've been on my radar screen since your sophomore year at Texas. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I was incredibly excited that you came to Seattle. One thing that's impressed me, and I've heard this same sentiment from several intellectual military veterans, you have this ability to identify the right of an individual to exercise an inalienable constitutional freedom. And I've heard you talk briefly about, the important First Amendment rights, and it doesn't just cover popular speech. And if anyone disagrees with the message that's being delivered, that's their right as well. But there is a clear distinction in your mind of something that seems to oftentimes be confused, but that line that separates the message from the right to deliver that message. Can you talk about how you came across that, the ability to kind of discern that delta there?
That's a tough question. I don't really know where that came from. I think my mom's actually told me before when I was younger that I always had a big issue with things that weren't fair and weren't equal, in some way, right? And I think through my time in the military and I've traveled quite a bit around the world, met a lot of different people from different cultures. Some of them I have a real hard time understanding why they believe what they believe and where they're coming from. But the more I'm around them and communicate with them and listen to them, I also understand that we're pretty similar. We have so much more in common than we have that is different. And I start to realize and recognize that, what, if I was just born here as a part of this family, I would believe these things too. Like, this is what I would believe because that's how you're raised. It's what's taught to you. And when you're a young child, especially a young child, your mind is shaped quite a bit. And you become the person that, in a lot of ways, the person that you will always be, and feel that way about things. And your experiences are attached to your emotions, are attached to your feelings. They're very much attached to what you think and feel and believe. Not very much. They completely are. That's why we believe what we believe and think the way that we think, feel the way we feel, because of what we've experienced, what we've seen, what we've gone through, what we were taught, all those things. And so for me to say that my experiences or feelings or whatever are better or more important or right, and somebody else's are less and wrong, is really, really arrogant.
Yeah.
Even if I feel so strongly about it, like I'm just so sure that this is the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is. It just means that I feel that way, and that's fine. But I want to live in a world where we all can be different and still appreciate one another, respect one another, but give each other their due time. And when you listen to somebody, like, really listen to them, really listen. Don't just hear them. Don't just like shut up until it's your turn to talk. Like, really listen to them and try to understand where they're coming from, try to learn from them, and then honor them in some way, acknowledge what they're saying as like that it's not always just right or wrong. It's not always just black or white. Like, things are not like that. Even people that I think are evil, even that something that I believe in the core of me is just pure evil, still trying to understand where that's coming from and why, and acknowledging it. It doesn't mean that I have to think it's okay. It doesn't mean that at all, but just understanding that. So when it comes to the Colin Kaepernick situation, where, I didn't think there was anything evil about what he was saying, what he was doing. There was definitely inflammatory things that a lot of people took offense to, and that's okay. Like, they have every right to feel that. I didn't feel it in that same way, even though when I look up at the flag and when I hear the national anthem, I feel something very strong, I feel something that I'm very proud of from my experiences. I've carried a casket draped in an American flag with my best friend's body in it. You know what I mean? So like, that's going to mean something different to me. And Colin understood that, when I talked to him, and he didn't attack me in any way. And he wasn't like saying things like, yeah, but don't you understand this and that about the history of that, of what that flag represents to from where I stand. Like, he didn't say those things. And so there was that like mutual respect. Even though there's plenty of things that we think and believe that are different, I understand. I don't even know if I understand, but I can at least acknowledge that what he's feeling is based on what he's experienced. And, he's lending a voice to a lot of people that don't have one, that feel the same way that he does. And at the end of the day, I think he wants what's best for humanity in his view of what that looks like. And so to go back to your very first question, like that is patriotic,
Yeah.
It may be a different form of patriotism and a lot of people may not like it. And that's okay. Like you have that right to not like that as well. But like you said, as it pertains to rights, I mean, when I took the oath to join the military, when all of us took the oath, it is literally to defend the Constitution, which includes the First Amendment, which is, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So like, that's what we fought for. We don't have to agree with everything that everybody says, but we fought for that right. And so, that was something that I think he was exercising, something very American, even though so many people think that what he stands for and what he says is all anti-American. It's a very American thing that he was doing.
We can look back on the history of protests by American athletes, and we can step back to like the 1968 Summer Olympics, and probably, the most poignant thing that's happened, just before our lifetimes. But two Americans, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, displayed a wildly unpopular form of protest after their 200-meter dash event. And, everybody's seen the picture of them standing on the podium with the fist raised. But part of the story people don't realize is the price they paid for that. So both athletes were asked to be removed from the Olympic Village, and the United States Olympic Committee said, no, we're not gonna remove them. They're part of the team. And then the International Olympic Committee said, if you don't remove them, then we'll expel the entire U.S. track team. And at that point, they relented and asked Tommy and John to leave the committee. But their protest is based on human rights and equality. And now we have somebody that went from winning the 1968 gold medal to not being allowed to compete in international track events ever again. And the tie-in to what we do is here's a man that, little known fact, and actually a guy from your old neighborhood was instrumental in this. At the time, the wide receivers coach for the Bengals was a gentleman by the name of Bill Walsh. And he was instrumental in bringing Tommy Smith to the Cincinnati Bengals. And Tommy Smith played for 3 years. I think he appeared in a couple games, but at the time it was called the taxi squad. Now we call it the practice squad. But Tommy Smith was a member of the Cincinnati Bengals like 1969 to 1972. So let me ask you this question as a tie-in. Do you envision history being as kind to Colin Kaepernick as it's been to Tommy Smith?
I have no idea. But all those guys, even from Jackie Robinson to Muhammad Ali,
sure,
to probably, a lot of women too, that I don't know the full background, full story, but I think of like Wilma Rudolph and Billie Jean King, and a lot of people through history, through time, athletes that they had a period of time where they were hated by a lot of people, and history. I think at that point they probably didn't think that they would be honored in the way that they are, and sort of revered and followed and seen as pioneers. Looking at it now, so I feel like the odds are good that will happen at some level with Colin. I think all those people in all those situations are very different. I don't want to just lump them into like, they're all just X type of activists.
Sure,
they're all individuals. They're all individuals that have their own way. I've spent a lot of time with Jim Brown, and I've spent a lot of time with Tommy Smith as well, and gotten to know those guys a little bit. And they're characters, but they're very different, and they believe very different things today. And that's super interesting. I think that's great. I feel like Colin, there's a good chance he'll be the same way. He'll have his own. He'll find his own way as he goes, and sort of continue to be shaped. Especially into your older years. I think that with more experience and the way that you see history sort of play out, your perspective changes in some way. It always develops and is shaped.
Let's shift gears here to a little bit lighter note. As we're preparing to have you as a guest, and I know you and I have communicated via email off and on for months and months and months, just about military veteran support events and that kind of thing. But, this is just something Josh and I talked about. As we're pouring through your history, you're kind of like a little bit of a Frank Abagnale type guy, and not from the criminal side of it, or you're definitely not a BS type guy, but you are 100% fake it till you make it. That is the mantra of your life. You say anything is possible. And I'll give you some examples. You'd already mentioned how you made it to Darfur and how you made it onto a UN flight. That was 100% fake it till you make it. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. You're definitely not wrong.
So
and
another
there is an
avenue.
element of BS for sure in my life too. So
Yeah,
don't leave that out.
all for good. I can tell you this. I mean, those that listen to the podcast know I need a 12-step program for my fishing addiction. And I see that you work as a deckhand for like a year down in San Diego, and you don't get a job as a deckhand sport fishing unless your dad's buddies with the boat owner or the skipper. You've got a ton of experience, or what I'm guessing happened with you is you convinced them that you've got experience that you don't have. Am I
Yeah,
right there?
that is correct. I mean, I'd been deep sea fishing once or twice, but
Yeah.
I did not. But you know what I did do is I was willing to work for free starting out. And I went out there, and the first day on the boat, I puked my guts out. And, I couldn't find the prop wash because I didn't understand the prop wash
Right.
was the white water kicked up by the propellers because somebody sent me off to look for prop wash. They all knew I had no clue, and I wasn't supposed to be there. But I worked really hard, and I did what I was supposed to do. And they asked me to come back the next day, and then eventually I had a job, and I did that. And I also, to speak on your fishing addiction real quick, I did have the opportunity when I was stationed out in Okinawa, Japan. I went fly fishing in Kamchatka with my dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he came out, and so we went rainbow trout fly fishing for a week or so in Kamchatka, and that was an incredible trip. I don't know if we saw another human being except for the people that were carting us around. We saw more bears than people for sure, and definitely more fish.
I was almost convinced with the catch me if you can thought before we came onto the podcast, Mark. But then once he brought up the United Nations flight thing, I was like, okay, this is sealed. It's definitely Break Abagnale.
You don't apply to be a walk-on at UT and say, hey, by the way, I'm 30, never played, don't have any footage because I've never played a down of organized football. So what time should I be there?
And I know we're basically the same age. You're a few months older than me, and I didn't realize that until I was doing some more research on you. And man, I need to get to work. That's all I've really learned out of this. I'm really behind.
You're right where you're supposed to be. I promise you that. As that may be, you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
We're going to move on to some of your charitable things that you do. And yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of an organization called MVP. You mentioned it earlier, merging vets and players. You and Jay Glazer founded the organization. Can you tell us a little bit more in depth about the work that you guys do at MVP?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very lucky to have MVP just for myself, just to be a member. But yeah, 5 years ago, sitting in Jay's living room talking about the similarities between combat vets and former professional athletes and like what they go through after they're done, after they hang it up. I mean, typically you're in your 20s, 30s if you're lucky, and you lose who you are. You lose that identity. And it's like that feeling of I'll never be great again is pretty substantial and very scary. And also, yeah, you just lose that camaraderie in locker room and purpose and mission and like all those things. I mean, when you're a football player, you get up in the morning and like you're a football player and you're getting ready. Everything you do is in preparation for the game that week or for practice or for, all the little things you do to make sure your body's tuned up and your mind's tuned up. I mean, it's like, it's insane. There's only a few players out there that just have so much pure athletic ability and they still work hard, but they don't have to absolutely stay on top of it every second of every day. Most players in the NFL or any other of these professional sports leagues, it's every day, 365 days a year that they have to focus on that and work towards that and, maintain that. And it's the same in the military. I mean, you become complacent in the military and somebody dies, you know what I mean? And that's on your hands. Like you can't do that. And it's like this heightened level of awareness. And obviously in the military, the difference is that we experience some really heavy stuff and some really tough stuff. And that can affect us as well. But one of the biggest things when you talk to a veteran, one of the biggest things they'll say that they miss is just the guys, the team, the brotherhood. And that's the same in sports. That's a common thing. That's just, you look back as an athlete, and you remember how fun it was when you were 8 years old playing these games, and what that was like, that experience and, getting ready for game day and all that stuff. It's very exciting. And it's a big part of your life. So with MVP, we've been able to build that new locker room again, build that team again, and help one another remember not only like who they were and what what they were willing to sacrifice to be elite and how to harness that again, but then like transfer it into something else. And then the next phase of life, sometimes that's just being a better mother or brother or whatever that thing is in your life, but also like, what passions do I have? What am I interested in? How can I like continue to chase my American dream in some way? That's really important for me, regardless of the other stuff, because that other stuff's the most important thing, you know, who you are as a person. But that is a big part of who I am as a person, is like, what dreams am I chasing? You know, what things do I care about? And am I taking steps every day to achieve those things or to be a part of that? I think that's the biggest thing for MVP. That's important is pushing one another, and also being willing to ask one another for help, and to be truly vulnerable. I don't mean just like getting emotional, but just like I said earlier, really acknowledging where you're at and being okay with that, and speaking it into the universe, you know, and talking to people about it. Like, hey, like I know I did X, Y, and Z, and that looks great on paper, but right now I don't feel like that. I don't feel like I'm elite. I don't feel like I belong. And I just, you know, I need help. And I think that's a huge part of that. I mean, that's something with the mental health sphere, not just in America, but in the world right now, that's like becoming, I guess, a less taboo thing to talk about, you know, because we were trained in the military to suck it up and drive on. And coaches would say in football, hey, are you hurt or are you injured? And make that distinction. And I think that's something that is changing, thankfully. And, you know, we just have to keep on that. You know, we have to keep pushing one another and being open with one another, and willing to not only listen, but willing to speak it when we're the ones that are struggling, willing to acknowledge it, recognize it.
Well, as somebody that is a sports fan, and as someone, and Mark is the same way, we have several family members that have been in the military and that are veterans who have served. I can't thank you enough for your work that you've done. Your story is truly inspiring. I know it's helped me understand a lot of things further, and can't thank you enough for your efforts, and keep up the great work, man. It's truly appreciated.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
I can tell you this, and I've been around guys, and it is so humbling to know that people that took 6 years out of the prime of your lives and dedicated it to defending and bringing the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans to others across the globe. And then to say, well, that wasn't quite enough. Let me work on behalf of those that also did that, and to make the transition out of the military easier. I guess, you know, when I see the people that are involved with MVP, and Josh mentioned Andrew Whitworth, but I mean people that, quite frankly, have moved me to tears knowing their story, of people like Florent Groberg or Kirstie Ennis. I mean, just absolutely, we could spend an hour talking about just those two individuals. What is the secret of that magnetic draw that so many incredible people are part of MVP?
I think that we all have trauma. You know what I mean? We all have things in our life that we're not proud of. We all have things we wish we could have done different. I mean, anybody that tells me like I have zero regrets, I have a bit of a hard time. I don't want to say I don't believe them, but it's like, maybe some people genuinely don't. And I understand that, like, we can't change the past, of course, and that past somewhat shapes who we are now. And so there's always positives in all those really hard things somewhere, but there's still things I look back on, and, you know, I wish I would have, and woulda, coulda, and all that stuff. Like, you know, we all have that, and we all get angry sometimes at what has happened in the past, and that's okay. Like, I think if you let it consume you, it's not a good thing. But I think those people like Flo Groberg and Kirstie Ennis and so many of these war fighters that have done some incredibly heroic things and overcome so much, they like to hear from other people that sometimes life is hard, and that's all right. And just that, like I said, that recognition and acknowledgement is so huge. And that's what MVP does a really good job of doing. Just recognize that pain is pain, and like, to compare our scars is not going to ever help anybody. It's not about that. It's not about who has gone through more, whose life has been harder. It's not about any of that stuff. It's just about, like, where are we at right now, and what can we do, you know, together to continue to heal and continue to fight for those that can't fight for themselves as a unit. That's the biggest thing. And so, I mean, with MVP, you know, I do want to put this out there real quick before I forget, that the website, if people want to check out who we are and learn more, go to vetsandplayers.org and just listen to our stories, you know, and see what we're all about. If you're a combat vet or a former professional athlete, and you want to join, I mean, we're doing so many of these things via Zoom right now, our sessions, because of the pandemic and where we're at right now as a world. So we'd love to have you.
So when you go to that website, there's a couple things you can get engaged with. Right on the front page is a big red donate button. Vetsandplayers.org is the website. If you are looking for something above and beyond the standard, click a button and let me donate a few bucks. If you're interested in something like in-kind donations or corporate gifts, stock gifts, or if you want to host a fundraising event on their behalf, reach out to them at donor@vetsandplayers.org, and they will be glad to work alongside you. We want to, as a podcast, in support of your efforts. The Bengals in their history have had 361 wins. So when you go on to vetsandplayers.org, you can click the donate button, and I don't care if it's $5, $10, $25, but it gives you a spot where you can click a button and leave them a comment. So here's what we're going to challenge our listeners to do is leave a comment that says you heard Nate on Bengals Brawl. For every single contribution that comes in with a comment about the Bengals Brawl podcast will match $361 worth of those contributions. So every dollar you donate is going to end up being $2. If you can afford $5, that turns into $10, and all of those dollars are end up making a difference.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, guys.
No, absolutely.
That's really awesome. And I appreciate all the listeners out there, even if they can't give right now. And I encourage them to just check it out. There's so many great organizations out there. I'm not saying ours is the best one by any means, but it does make a difference. And we are helping a lot of people, and we're able to reach more people, you know, the more resources that we have, more vets, more athletes. And honestly, I think the veteran athlete communities are going to be a big part of helping to continue to bring this country back together and out of this sort of stuck place that I feel like we're in a lot of ways. And so that, you know, the contributions really do mean a lot.
Nate Boyer, absolutely thankful for the opportunity to get to sit down and visit with you. Thank you for being so gracious with your time once again. Vetsandplayers.org is the website. Go and check that out. If you can afford it, if it's in the cards, donate a few bucks to their efforts. Every nickel of that is going to go to putting an experience in front of merging a veteran and a professional athlete.
Nate, it's been our honor. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate both you guys so much. This was great.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.